It was supposed to be a warm family celebration inside a mansion filled with music and crystal chandeliers, but everything turned upside down the moment a jealous mistress decided to humiliate the wife in front of everyone. She poured a full glass of red wine on her cream dress and thought she had won. She had no idea that the most powerful man in the entire Blackwood family was about to walk in, witness the chaos, and deliver a slap heard across the mansion. What followed was a fierce showdown of betrayal, pride, and justice, brought down by the one man no one expected. The Blackwood family mansion seemed to glow under the early evening lights. It was the kind of place that felt alive even when no one was inside, but tonight it pulsed with the energy of a grand family gathering. Dozens of guests filled the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished marble floors. Soft jazz drifted through the air, blending with laughter and the gentle clinking of glasses. Everything shimmered with luxury, tradition, and the weight of old money. Abigail stood near a long table draped in white linen. She held a glass of sparkling water, trying to slow her breathing. Family events always made her feel a little nervous. Not because the Blackwoods were unkind, but because they were always watching, always measuring, always judging with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. She pressed her palm lightly against her dress, smoothing out an invisible crease. She wore a soft cream dress, elegant but modest, chosen carefully to blend in rather than stand out. Her dark hair was pinned behind her ear in a simple style. She felt comfortable in it, until she spotted Victoria. And just like that, the night shifted. Victoria appeared near the staircase the way a flame appears in a dark room. Her red velvet dress hugged her body. Her heels clicked against the marble with a kind of arrogant precision. She smiled at people who barely knew her, but acted as if she owned the mansion already. Her blonde curls bounced with each step, and her confident smirk said she enjoyed every eye that turned her way. Abigail stiffened. She had hoped Victoria wouldn't be here tonight, but of course, she was here. Victoria always showed up when she knew it would sting the most. Nathaniel, Abigail's husband, trailed behind Victoria with a wide grin. He whispered something to her that made her laugh loudly, too loudly for a family gathering, too loudly for a man who was still married. Abigail felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. She took a small sip of water. She had learned to swallow pain quietly. A group of relatives approached Nathaniel to greet him. He gave each of them a charming smile, then leaned closer to Victoria again. He did not once look at his wife across the room. The jazz music shifted into a brighter melody as waiters moved through the crowd with silver trays. Abigail stepped aside so they wouldn't bump into her. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and tried to focus on anything other than her husband and his mistress laughing together. She turned her eyes toward the grand piano in the corner. A young musician played with delicate fingertips. The long notes of the melody floated through the air like silk. For a moment, Abigail let herself breathe in that gentle rhythm. A moment of calm in the noise. But calm never lasted long around Victoria. A flash of red caught her attention, and Abigail realized Victoria was walking directly toward her. Not drifting, not gliding, politely walking with purpose, with a kind of predatory grace. Nathaniel followed a few steps behind, sipping champagne with the lazy confidence of someone who believed nothing could touch him inside these walls. Abigail kept her posture steady. Guests noticed the approaching trio and backed away slightly, creating an unspoken circle around them. The chatter softened. The air thickened. Victoria stopped right in front of Abigail. Her smile was sharp. Well, look who decided to attend after all. Her voice carried just enough volume for several guests to hear. Abigail blinked slowly to steady herself. "Good evening, Victoria." "Good evening?" Victoria laughed with fake surprise. "That's all you have to say while wearing that dress?" She glanced Abigail up and down in a slow, insulting sweep. "It looks a little simple for an event in this mansion, but I suppose you wore the best thing you could find." Nathaniel took another sip of champagne. Not one word of defense for his wife, not even a glance. Abigail felt her hands tighten around her glass. She didn't look away. "I'm comfortable in it." Victoria smirked. "Comfortable? Yes, that's an interesting word for someone who's one mistake away from being irrelevant here." Before Abigail could respond, Victoria reached for a nearby waiter. She plucked a full glass of deep red wine from his tray. She swirled it gently, raising her eyebrows at Abigail. "You know, this color might help your outfit. It needs something bold." Abigail took a step back, sensing something was wrong. The guests around them leaned in, unsure whether to intervene or watch. Victoria didn't hesitate. She tilted her wrist and poured the entire glass of red wine down the front of Abigail's cream dress. The liquid splashed like a crimson waterfall, staining the fabric instantly. Gasps erupted around the room. The pianist hit a wrong note, and the music stopped. Abigail stood frozen, breath caught in her throat. The cold wine slid down her skin. Her dress looked like it had been slashed open by a streak of blood. Victoria smiled sweetly and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "There. Now you look like you belong." The entire ballroom fell silent. Every smartphone lifted. The night had just begun. For a long moment, the ballroom remained suspended in absolute silence. It was as if the walls themselves held their breath. Every guest stood frozen between shock and disbelief. The soft glow of the chandeliers reflected in the dark red stain, spreading across Abigail's cream dress. The wine soaked through the delicate fabric and dripped onto the marble floor in slow, uneven drops. Abigail felt as if she were standing in the center of a spotlight no one asked to shine. Her pulse hammered in her ears, her fingers tightened involuntarily around her empty glass. Her throat felt dry despite the cool liquid that still clung to her skin. She could hear whispers forming, the kind of whispers meant to be secret, but loud enough to wound. Someone near the back gasped softly. Another guest placed a hand over her mouth. A waiter froze mid-step with a silver tray balanced carefully in his hands. The pianist stood up from the bench, unsure whether to continue playing or leave the room entirely. The atmosphere had shattered in a single moment. The music, the warmth, the laughter, all gone. Victoria watched Abigail closely, waiting for her reaction. Her bright red lips curled into a satisfied smile, the kind of smile that belonged to someone who believed she had finally won. She casually handed her empty wineglass back to the young waiter, who looked terrified to even touch it. She didn't care. Nathaniel stepped forward with a sigh. Not a sigh of concern, not a sigh of guilt. It was the sigh of a man inconvenienced by a public scene. He pinched the bridge of his nose as if Abigail were the one who had embarrassed him. Not Victoria, not himself, his wife. "For heaven's sake, Abigail," he muttered under his breath. "You always take everything so personally." He looked around and raised his voice slightly. She bumped into the glass. It was an accident. It was clear to everyone that no such accident had happened. Victoria had poured the wine deliberately and with enjoyment. The guests knew, the staff knew, even Nathaniel knew, but he chose to lie anyway. Abigail swallowed slowly, feeling a small tremor move through her chest. She lifted her gaze and met Nathaniel's eyes. He looked away. The flicker of shame on his face lasted barely a second before he composed himself and forced a smile for the onlookers. "Let's all relax," he said, as if he could will the tension away with cheap charm. "It's just a little wine." A little wine. On a family heirloom dress, in front of dozens of relatives, on a night that was supposed to be peaceful. His voice twisted the knife without raising it. Abigail stared at the spreading stain on her dress. She touched the fabric lightly. The texture felt different already. Sticky, heavy, ruined. A bubbling inside her chest threatened to spill over. It wasn't anger alone. It was humiliation, hurt, betrayal, all wrapped together so tightly she could hardly breathe. A soft whisper brushed her left ear. "Oh dear, poor thing." Another whisper came from the right. "Did you see how she just stood there? I would have slapped her. Nathaniel should control his women," someone else murmured. And there it was, the words that carried the weight of 100 judgments. Abigail closed her eyes for half a second. She wanted to disappear, just sink into the floor, become invisible. But the world refused to look away. Her aunt-in-law approached her slowly, a kind older woman with silver hair and warm eyes. She reached for Abigail's arm. "Sweetheart," she whispered gently, "let's get you cleaned up." Before Abigail could follow, Victoria laughed again. The sound cut through the room like broken glass. "No need to help her," Victoria said loudly. "She's fine. It's just a dress. Not everyone is used to wearing something expensive." The guests flinched at the cruelty in her tone. It was so unnecessary, so vicious, the kind of insult only someone confident in her protection would dare to use. Nathaniel placed a hand on Victoria's arm. "Victoria, please." But it was clear he meant it only because the guests were staring, not because he disapproved. Abigail drew a slow breath. The stain continued to grow, a dark, crimson reminder of what she had become in this household. A target, a joke, a convenient piece of furniture placed in the background while Nathaniel and Victoria took center stage. Her aunt squeezed her arm gently again. "Come with me, darling." Abigail nodded slightly. She didn't trust her voice yet. She took a step, but before she could leave, her cousin Ethan, a quiet man who rarely attended these gatherings, stepped in front of her. He looked at her with genuine worry. "Abigail, are you all right?" The words nearly broke her. Genuine concern felt foreign. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Ethan glared at Nathaniel across the room. "You allowed this?" Nathaniel bristled. "Allowed what?" "It was an accident. She's overreacting. Everyone is making this bigger than it is." Ethan shook his head slowly. "You know exactly what happened. We all saw it." Victoria scoffed and crossed her arms. "Are we really doing this? Abigail is always so dramatic." Abigail felt every eye turn to her again, waiting for her to respond, waiting to see whether she would accept humiliation silently or break under pressure. Her legs trembled, but she stayed upright. Ethan touched her shoulder gently. "You don't have to stand here and endure this." The guests whispered louder. "He's defending her," someone whispered near the grand piano. "Good. She needs it." "But Nathaniel won't like that," another responded quietly. Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Abigail, please stop drawing attention. This is embarrassing." Abigail finally spoke. Her voice was soft but controlled. "I am not the one who made a scene." The words were simple, quiet, yet they sliced through the room with perfect clarity. Several guests gasped again. Victoria's smile faltered. Abigail turned away from them. She held her ruined dress close to her body, as if gathering what little dignity she had left. The room felt colder somehow. The chandelier lights seemed harsher. Her aunt placed an arm around her shoulder. Ethan stepped beside her to shield her from more stares. Together, they began to guide her away from the disaster unfolding in the center of the ballroom. But everyone knew something far bigger was coming. The silence felt like the hush before a storm. Abigail followed her aunt and cousin through the edge of the ballroom, trying to steady her breath, while the whispers continued to rustle behind her. Each step felt heavy, as if the wine soaking her dress carried the weight of every judgmental eye in the room. She wished the walk to the side hallway felt shorter, but in a mansion this large, nothing ever happened quickly. The marble stretched endlessly under the soft yellow lights, reflecting the red stain on her dress like an accusation that refused to fade. Her aunt whispered reassuringly, "It's all right, sweetheart. We'll get you cleaned up. Don't listen to them." Ethan walked on her other side, lips pressed into a hard line. He kept glancing back as if ready to confront anyone who dared approach her again. His presence felt like a shield she hadn't known she needed until tonight. But Abigail knew the scene behind her was still alive. The whispers wouldn't stop. They would follow her, stick to her skin, haunt her long after the night ended. She felt it in the way some relatives avoided her eyes, in the way the waiters looked away, unsure whether offering help would anger Nathaniel. The humiliation clung to her as surely as the wine on her dress. When they reached the quieter hallway, Abigail leaned gently against the wall and exhaled. Her aunt produced a small napkin from her purse and dabbed at the stained fabric, but it only spread the color slightly. She let out a sad sigh. "It won't come out tonight. I'm sorry." Abigail shook her head. "It's fine. Thank you for helping me." Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice so only the three of them could hear. "Abigail, this is not your fault. Everyone saw what she did." Abigail met his eyes. Nathaniel won't admit it. Her voice trembled, but she forced it steady. "He will defend her. He always does." Ethan frowned deeply. He should defend his wife, not his mistress. The word hit Abigail like a stone. Mistress. She hated that it applied so easily and so publicly now. She had known about Victoria quietly, painfully, in private, but hearing the words spoken aloud by a family member made it more real than she had ever allowed herself to admit. Her aunt looked over her shoulder to ensure no one else approached. This cannot continue. Nathaniel has lost his sense of decency. Abigail wanted to agree, wanted to speak the truth she had buried inside for too long, but before she could answer, footsteps echoed down the hall. The rhythm was unmistakable. Nathaniel, his heavy, impatient stride, his expensive shoes tapping the marble with the confidence of a man who still believed he owned every space he walked through. He reached them with Victoria close behind him, her eyes gleaming with amusement, her walk casual, as if she hadn't just caused a scandal that silenced an entire ballroom. "There you are," Nathaniel said, his voice sharp with irritation. "You walked off and created an even bigger spectacle." Ethan immediately stepped in front of Abigail. "She walked off because you allowed someone to publicly humiliate her." Nathaniel scoffed and brushed imaginary dust from his jacket. "Don't exaggerate. It was wine. It will dry." Victoria laughed softly behind him. "He's right. Abigail always takes things too seriously." Abigail closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength. "You poured the wine on me deliberately." Victoria widened her eyes dramatically. "Me? Deliberately?" she giggled. "Oh, Abigail, you really should be careful with accusations like that." Ethan narrowed his gaze. "We all saw it." Victoria's smile didn't fade. "You saw what you wanted to see." Nathaniel rolled his shoulders and sighed loudly. "Enough." Abigail apologized to Victoria for suggesting she did something on purpose. Abigail stared at him. Surely she misheard. "You want me to apologize?" "Yes," Nathaniel replied without hesitation, "before this gets blown out of proportion and embarrasses the family even more." There it was, the sentence that revealed everything. Not the truth, not loyalty, not fairness, only the preservation of the Blackwood name, the reputation he believed Abigail could ruin simply by existing outside his control. Her aunt gasped softly. "Nathaniel, that is unacceptable." He turned to her with a cold expression. "This is between me and my wife. Please stay out of it." Ethan stepped forward again, jaw clenched. "You don't get to speak to her like that." Nathaniel squared his shoulders. "Don't lecture me on how to handle my marriage. Abigail knows her role." Her role. The phrase tightened something in Abigail's chest. It felt like a reminder of every moment he dismissed her, every night he came home late and smelled of perfume that wasn't hers. Every morning he handed her a schedule of what he wanted her to wear, how he wanted her to speak, who he wanted her to avoid. A wife molded to his convenience, a background character in her own life. She looked directly at him. "My role is not to let your mistress humiliate me." Victoria's fake smile finally cracked. "Watch your tone." Ethan raised a hand toward Victoria. "You should watch yours." Nathaniel stepped between them, his voice sharpened. "Ethan, this is not your business. You've always been jealous. Everyone knows it." Ethan blinked, stunned for a second, then laughed humorlessly. "Jealous? Of you, Nathaniel? You've lost your mind." Victoria folded her arms and leaned into Nathaniel with a smug expression. "Let's not waste time." She already embarrassed herself. "Let's return to the party." Abigail's aunt spoke with quiet firmness. "The only embarrassment here is your behavior." Nathaniel ignored her completely. "Abigail, apologize. Then change your dress. We still have speeches tonight." Abigail stared at him. The hallway seemed to dim around the edges. She heard the distant music starting up again, but it no longer softened anything. It only served as a reminder that the world expected her to fix the scene so Nathaniel could continue his performance of a perfect family gathering. She straightened her back. Her hands trembled, but she didn't hide it. "I will not apologize," she said. Nathaniel's eyes widened. Victoria stiffened. Ethan exhaled in relief. Her aunt squeezed her hand. Nathaniel leaned in, his voice low and threatening. "You are making a mistake." Abigail didn't look away. "The only mistake tonight was letting her treat me like this." For the first time, a ripple of uncertainty passed over Nathaniel's face. It was brief, but Abigail saw it. The control he believed he had was slipping. Victoria scoffed. "Please, she's just being dramatic again." Ethan stepped closer to Abigail. "You are not dramatic. You are finally standing up for yourself." The hallway filled with a different kind of tension now. Not humiliation, not fear, something stronger, something braver. The balance was shifting, and everyone could feel it. The tension in the hallway grew heavier with every passing second. It felt as if the walls themselves were pressing inward, forcing every truth that had been ignored for months out into the open. The soft music drifting from the ballroom no longer sounded elegant. It sounded distant and hollow, as though it belonged to a different night entirely, a night in which humiliation had not yet happened and loyalties had not yet been tested. Ethan remained beside Abigail with a firm stance, one that told Nathaniel he would not back down. Her aunt stood on her other side, lips trembling with both anger and worry. Victoria's heels clicked sharply as she shifted her weight. The sound echoed down the hallway like tiny snaps of impatience. Nathaniel looked at Abigail with a simmering frustration. He seemed ready to force the situation back under control through sheer intimidation. "Abigail, you are not helping yourself. Apologize so we can return to the event. Everyone is watching." She met his eyes without flinching. Everyone saw what she did. Victoria laughed softly. "You poor thing, still clinging to that fantasy." Ethan turned sharply toward Victoria. "It's not a fantasy. Your hand moved on purpose. You poured the wine deliberately." Victoria smirked. "Convince yourself however you need to." Nathaniel held up a hand to silence everyone. "Enough. I am ending this." His voice rose slightly, and even from the hallway, Abigail could hear the murmurs in the ballroom shift. People were listening. Guests were turning their heads toward the hallway, sensing that something explosive was building. Abigail attempted to step back from the confrontation, but Nathaniel blocked her path. He took a step forward, pointing directly at her soaked dress. "Look at you. You let this ruin the night. You never know how to behave." Her aunt gasped. "Nathaniel, that is cruel." Nathaniel ignored her. "You make everything difficult. I'm tired of it." Abigail's pulse throbbed in her throat. She felt the weight of humiliation returning, but beneath it, something else stirred, something deeper, something long ignored. Ethan's voice broke through. "You don't get to talk to her like that." Nathaniel spun toward him. "Stay out of it. I'm handling my wife. Handling." The word struck Abigail like another stain across her skin. Nathaniel always said things like that, handling, managing, fixing, as if she were a problem to correct. Never a partner, never a person. Before she could respond, a waiter hurried down the hallway, face pale. He held his phone awkwardly against his chest, as if trying to hide it. Victoria shot him a sharp glare. "What are you doing back here? Go serve the guests." But the young man hesitated. His eyes flicked to Abigail, then to Nathaniel. "Sir, I think you should know. People in the ballroom recorded what happened. The wine, the comments. It's already being shared." Nathaniel's face drained of color. "What do you mean, shared?" The waiter swallowed hard. "Some guests uploaded it already. You can hear everything clearly. The microphones from the band picked up the sound." A ripple passed through the hallway like a gust of cold wind. Victoria's reaction came faster than anyone else's. "Give me your phone, now." But the waiter stepped back cautiously. "I can't. Several people are recording it. I saw at least 4 different angles." Abigail blinked, stunned. She hadn't realized the band's microphones had captured the moment so sharply. The ballroom had been filled with sound, and yet the silence around the wine splash must have made every detail painfully crisp. Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair. "This is ridiculous. They had no right. I didn't give permission for that." Ethan folded his arms. "You don't get to erase it." Victoria scoffed. "It's a private event. We'll tell them to delete it." The waiter shook his head quickly. "People already left the room to make calls. I think reporters may have been alerted." A fresh silence slammed into the group. Reporters. In this family, that word carried the threat of 1,000 consequences. Public shame, company scandals, investment backlash, everything Nathaniel valued most. He stepped toward the waiter. "You will bring me the phone now." The young man shook his head again. "I'm sorry, I can't. Others have it too." Nathaniel clenched his fist, but forced his hand to remain at his side. He couldn't be seen threatening staff. Not now. Not when eyes were already watching. Victoria tried to regain control of the moment. "Fine. We'll go back into the ballroom and smooth things over. We'll tell them it was a misunderstanding. Abigail tripped and bumped into me. That lie won't hold. Ethan stepped forward. Nathaniel narrowed his gaze. It doesn't matter if it holds. What matters is that the narrative stays clean. Abigail couldn't believe what she was hearing. You care more about a narrative than what really happened? Nathaniel turned slowly to face her. Yes, because narratives shape reputations, and reputations shape power, something you never understood. Her aunt let out a soft cry of disbelief. Nathaniel, she is your wife. But Nathaniel didn't look at his aunt. He focused entirely on Abigail. If you had behaved properly, none of this would have happened. The words stung more than the wine had. Victoria slipped her arm around Nathaniel. Come on, let's return and fix this. We can tell everyone she misunderstood. The video already shows what happened, Ethan said. You can't rewrite it, Nathaniel glared. Watch me. He reached for Abigail's arm as if to drag her back into the ballroom and force a public apology out of her, but Ethan grabbed Nathaniel's wrist firmly, stopping him mid-movement. Abigail froze. Victoria gasped. Her aunt covered her mouth. Nathaniel's face darkened. Let go! Ethan refused. You have gone too far. Abigail's chest tightened. Ethan's grip remained strong, his expression unwavering. The thin thread holding the night together finally snapped, because now everyone in the ballroom had gathered near the entrance. They had seen the attempt to pull Abigail. They had heard the raised voices. Phones were raised again. Faces were tense. A wall of witnesses stood only a few steps away. The evidence was no longer hidden, and Nathaniel had nowhere to hide. The crowd at the entrance of the ballroom grew thicker by the second. Faces pressed forward with a mixture of shock and concern. The soft glow of the chandeliers cast long reflections across dozens of phones raised in the air. The quiet hum of the earlier music was completely gone. In its place was the tense murmur of people trying to understand how a private family gathering had turned into a public spectacle. Ethan still held Nathaniel's wrist in a firm, unmoving grip. His jaw was tight, his shoulders squared. It was clear he would not allow Nathaniel to drag Abigail anywhere. Nathaniel glared back with rising anger, but something in Ethan's posture kept him from lashing out further. Victoria stepped behind Nathaniel and hissed in his ear, Do something. They're all watching. But Nathaniel knew he was cornered. The witnesses, the phones, the captured audio, every move he made would echo far beyond the walls of the mansion. Abigail stood motionless, breathing unevenly. She felt as if her body no longer belonged to her. Her dress clung cold and heavy against her skin. The wine stain seemed brighter under the lights. She wanted to step back into the shadows. She wanted to disappear, but instead, she found herself becoming the center of a storm she never asked for. Her aunt tugged gently on her hand. Stay with me. I'm right here. The soft tremor in the older woman's voice said she feared what Nathaniel might do next. A voice rose from the crowd. Someone call for help. Another voice followed. Get the staff. This has gone too far. A third voice said firmly, She needs medical attention. That amount of stress is dangerous. Abigail looked up in startled confusion. She hadn't even realized her hands were shaking violently. Her fingers felt numb. Her breath came faster than she wanted. The humiliation and fear had tangled inside her until her whole body felt unsteady. A middle-aged guest approached with authority. He placed himself between Nathaniel and Abigail. Step back, he told Nathaniel. You are not touching her again. Nathaniel scoffed. You have no right to intervene. The man replied calmly. She looks physically distressed. His expression hardened, and this is no longer a private argument. Several guests nodded. The sense of collective judgment rolled through the room like a tide. Nathaniel suddenly looked smaller, less untouchable, less feared. A security guard from the mansion arrived next. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a calm expression. He glanced at the crowd, then at Abigail's soaked dress, then at Nathaniel's tense posture. Sir, the guard said carefully, I have been asked to check on the situation. Victoria stepped forward before Nathaniel could speak. She's fine, she snapped. This is being blown out of proportion. But the guard did not look at Victoria. He kept his gaze on Nathaniel. Is there anything happening here that requires staff intervention? Ethan released Nathaniel's wrist, only when he was certain the guard had stepped between them. Abigail exhaled shakily. Her aunt wrapped an arm around her shoulders and pulled her slightly behind the guard. Another voice rose from the crowd. "Someone bring ice or cold towels." A young woman rushed forward, carrying a folded cloth. She offered it to Abigail with kind eyes. "Put this on your chest," she said softly. "Your breathing looks tight. It might help." Abigail accepted the cloth with trembling fingers. The cool fabric pressed against her skin brought a faint sense of relief. Not enough to steady her fully, but enough to remind her she was not entirely alone. More guests formed a protective circle around her, people she barely knew, people who had watched her from afar for years, people who had never spoken up before. But tonight, they stood between her and the two people who had humiliated her. Nathaniel looked around with a rising panic. He could sense the shift. The loyalty he always assumed he possessed was slipping away. The power he believed he commanded was dissolving in front of him. He lifted his hands in frustration. "Stop acting like I hurt her." It was a misunderstanding. A woman across the room shouted, "We saw you grab her arm." "We saw your mistress pour the wine," another added. A third voice echoed, "This is not acceptable behavior." Victoria's smile flickered. Everyone is being dramatic. This family is always judgmental. But no one listened. The room had already chosen a side, and it was not hers. The guard spoke firmly. "Sir, you need to step away for the moment. I will escort her to a quieter room to ensure she is safe." Nathaniel's eyes widened. "She does not need to be escorted anywhere." Ethan stepped closer again. "She does." Abigail swallowed hard. "I can walk. Please don't escalate this further." Her aunt looked at her with worry. "You're shaking, dear. Let's just get you somewhere calm." The guard nodded. "I will take her to the private lounge. It's quieter and away from the crowd." Abigail hesitated. She didn't want to appear weak. She didn't want Nathaniel or Victoria to see her retreating. But the thudding in her chest told her she needed a moment of peace before she collapsed. She nodded quietly. "All right." As she stepped forward, several guests formed a protective path. Phones lowered, faces softened. Even those who had judged her earlier now carried guilt in their eyes. They had watched silently for too long. Nathaniel made one last attempt to reach for her. "Abigail, don't walk away." But the guard stepped between them again. "Please let her go." Abigail did not turn around. She did not look at Nathaniel or Victoria. She walked toward the lounge with her aunt and Ethan at her sides. Each step felt fragile, but it also felt like the beginning of something different, something stronger. Behind her, murmurs began rising again. The crowd was no longer whispering about a scandal. They were whispering about consequences, accountability, evidence. As the guard opened the door to the private lounge, Abigail stepped through. The moment she crossed the threshold, she realized something important. This was the first time tonight that she felt safe. The private lounge door closed behind Abigail with a soft click, but the tension outside in the hallway only grew sharper. Inside the ballroom, the crowd that had gathered near the entrance slowly drifted back toward the center of the room, though no one returned to the carefree atmosphere from earlier. The elegant music resumed, but it sounded wrong, now forced, uneven, a thin veil trying to cover a widening crack. Nathaniel remained frozen near the hallway, struggling to regain control of the moment. His jaw was clenched so tightly that the muscle along the side of his face pulsed visibly. Victoria stood next to him, arms crossed, eyes darting nervously between guests. Her earlier smug confidence had evaporated. In its place was a flicker of fear, a fear she tried to mask beneath a strained smile, but the crowd no longer pretended not to stare. Conversations shifted to open commentary. "I can't believe he acted like that," one woman whispered loudly. Another replied, "It was unacceptable, and the whole thing is on video." A man near the piano added, "Online already. Look at this." He raised his phone, screen glowing. The people closest to him leaned in. The audio from the short clip was painfully clear. Victoria's voice, the splash of wine, Nathaniel's tone as he demanded Abigail apologize. Everything that had seemed hidden behind wealth and status was now exposed for strangers to judge. Victoria sputtered, "What are they showing? Give me that phone." But the man pulled it away calmly. "Don't touch me." Nathaniel closed his eyes for a moment, visibly distressed. "This can't be happening." Someone near the buffet table responded. "Well, it is." The pianist stopped playing again. His hands hovered over the keys. He glanced nervously toward the door, as if waiting for approval to escape. Cousins who usually adored Nathaniel now whispered with disgust. Family friends who had once boasted about their association with the Blackwoods looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight, avoiding eye contact with him. A few whispered into their phones. Some forwarded the video to others. Then, a familiar figure strode forward from the crowd. Miss Pierce, the longtime attorney who handled many of the Blackwood business affairs. She was tall, poised, and known for an expression that always seemed to predict disaster before it arrived. Tonight, her expression said disaster had already arrived. She approached Nathaniel with measured steps. "Do you understand the severity of this incident?" she asked quietly, but loud enough for several people to hear. Nathaniel rubbed his temples. "It's being blown out of proportion." Miss Pierce did not blink. "No, Nathaniel. The audio is clear. The video is worse. And this is a house full of influential people. This will not disappear." Victoria grabbed Nathaniel's arm. "Tell her to do something." Miss Pierce spoke without even looking at Victoria. "I am not your attorney." She turned back to Nathaniel. "And legally speaking, she is the problem." Victoria glared. "Excuse me?" Miss Pierce held up a hand sharply. "Do not speak." Several guests watched with open fascination. This was no longer a family argument. It was the beginning of a legal unraveling. Nathaniel tried to straighten his jacket, but his hands shook. "I'll handle this." Miss Pierce shook her head firmly. "No, you will not, because every minute you stall is another minute of footage being shared online." She motioned toward the far end of the room. "Look." Nathaniel followed her gaze. A group of younger guests stood in a circle, phones raised. They were filming again, this time broadcasting the unfolding chaos. Some faces wore pity, others excitement, others righteous anger. One of Nathaniel's uncles stepped forward, red-faced and trembling. "You have humiliated this family." Victoria stepped in front of Nathaniel protectively. "Stop blaming him. You're all acting ridiculous. It was just a little wine." A collective gasp rose. The uncle stared at her as if she had slapped him. "Just a little wine?" he repeated. "And just a little public cruelty, and just a little attempt to drag her back by the arm. Is that your measure of acceptable behavior?" Victoria opened her mouth, but his raised hand silenced her instantly. Another family member, Aunt Eleanor, approached with her phone. She pushed the screen toward Nathaniel. "This clip has 60,000 views already." Nathaniel blanched. "Impossible." "It was posted 10 minutes ago," Eleanor said. "People are tagging journalists." Victoria grabbed the phone from her hand. "Show me." But the comments hit her harder than any slap could have. "Disgraceful. Poor woman. She deserves better. Classic cheating husband behavior. Arrogant mistress thinks she owns the place. Family money doesn't excuse abuse." Victoria's lips trembled. "This is twisted. People are lying." Eleanor snatched her phone back. "The truth is, right there on video." Nathaniel stepped back as if physically struck. His eyes darted across the room. Every gaze felt like an attack. Every whisper felt like a threat. His carefully built reputation, his image as the polished heir to the Blackwood legacy, all of it balanced on a single, crumbling edge. The mansion's head of staff, Mr. Hayes, hurried to the ballroom. His voice boomed across the space. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your tables." But no one moved. Instead, they watched him as if expecting the next announcement to be a verdict. Mr. Hayes lowered his voice when he reached Nathaniel. "Sir, several guests have requested formal statements. There is concern about safety and liability." Nathaniel went pale. "Liability?" Mr. Hayes nodded. "They are asking if they should contact the authorities." Victoria gasped. "What?" "No." A younger woman in the crowd spoke firmly. "It would be the responsible thing to do. She was shaken and humiliated, and he tried to drag her." Someone else added, "This qualifies as public harassment." And filmed harassment, another voice joined in. Nathaniel looked around the ballroom. Everywhere he turned, he found accusation, judgment. Phones raised like mirrored evidence. He tried to steady his voice. Everyone is overreacting. A man in a suit stepped forward. The only overreaction came from you and your mistress. Victoria flushed scarlet. Nathaniel grabbed her arm. We will leave. But Miss Pierce stepped in front of him. You are not going anywhere. You need to stay until this is addressed. Running will make it worse. Nathaniel opened his mouth but found no words. The storm had broken around him, and there was no shelter left. The private lounge felt quiet enough to hear her own heartbeat. Abigail sat on a velvet chair near a low table, her hands clasped together tightly in her lap. The soft lighting made the room warmer than the ballroom outside, but she couldn't shake the cold that had settled deep in her chest. Her ruined dress clung to her skin. The dried wine left faint streaks along her arms. She inhaled deeply and tried to steady the trembling in her fingers. Her aunt hovered nearby, pacing softly. Ethan stood by the door, arms folded, listening for any sign of trouble from outside. He kept glancing back at her with worry. He had seen the way the crowd turned. He had seen the panic creeping into Nathaniel's eyes. He knew the storm was not over yet. "Do you want water?" her aunt asked softly. Abigail shook her head. Not yet. She needed a moment to understand the strange new feeling rising inside her. It was not the fear that had followed her into the lounge, nor was it the humiliation that had drenched her like the wine. It was something quieter, stronger, a voice she had silenced for years, whispering that she did not deserve any of this. Not the insults, not the dismissal, not the cruelty disguised as partnership. The door opened slightly. Ethan tensed, ready to push back anyone who shouldn't enter. But it was only Mr. Hayes, the head of staff. He bowed his head respectfully. "Mrs. Blackwood, the situation outside is escalating." Abigail straightened a little. "How?" "Many guests are demanding answers," Mr. Hayes said. "Some want to speak to you directly. Some are waiting for your husband to address the incident." He hesitated. "Others are asking to contact the authorities." Her aunt gasped. "Authorities? Good heavens." Ethan nodded grimly. "They should. This is not something to ignore anymore." Abigail looked down at her stained dress again. The dark red mark had dried stiff against the light fabric. The color made her stomach twist. For years, she had swallowed insults quietly. For years, she believed keeping peace was better than speaking truth. But tonight, the world had seen everything. Tonight, she could not hide behind silence even if she wanted to. She touched the edge of the stain with her fingertip and whispered, "Enough." Her aunt moved closer. "Dear, what did you say?" Abigail lifted her head. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I said, enough." Ethan's eyes softened. "Good." Mr. Hayes looked relieved. "Mrs. Blackwood, the family is gathering in the hallway. They are demanding that your husband come forward and explain himself." Abigail let out a slow breath. "He won't." "No," Ethan agreed. "He will try to twist it." "And blame you," her aunt added wearily. Abigail nodded. "He always does." But something changed in her posture. She sat taller. She pressed her palms against her knees to ground herself. The trembling stopped. A strange calm washed through her. Not resignation, not retreat, something closer to resolve. "Bring me a shawl or something clean," she said quietly. Her aunt hurried to the coat rack and retrieved a pale, embroidered shawl. She wrapped it around Abigail's shoulders, carefully trying not to touch the stained part of the dress. The soft fabric felt gentle against Abigail's skin. Mr. Hayes stepped closer. "Do you wish to address the guests? If you do not, I can escort you through a side exit." "No," Abigail said. "I will not leave. Nathaniel wanted to silence me. Victoria wanted to humiliate me. I will not disappear and let them speak for me." Her aunt blinked. "Abigail, are you sure?" "Yes," she said simply, and she was. The lounge door creaked open again. This time, it was Nathaniel. His face was flushed with panic. Victoria followed right behind him, clutching her phone with trembling hands. They both froze when they saw Abigail standing upright and calm, her posture strong despite everything. Nathaniel exhaled in relief. "Thank God. Abigail, we need to talk." Ethan stepped between them instantly. "No, you don't get to pressure her again." Nathaniel glared at him. "Stay out of this." "I will not," Ethan replied calmly. Victoria pointed at Abigail. "You need to come out and tell the guests you misunderstood what happened." Abigail raised her eyebrows. Misunderstood? Yes, Victoria insisted. You tripped. The glass slipped. You made it look intentional. Abigail stared at her in disbelief. I didn't make anything look intentional. You did that all on your own. Victoria's jaw tightened. If you don't clear this up, reporters will get involved. Nathaniel's company will suffer. His reputation will suffer. You will be responsible for destroying everything. Abigail's voice was cool, level. That's what Nathaniel always said, that I would be responsible for everything. Nathaniel looked at her with a strained smile. Abigail, please don't do this. You know how important tonight is. Yes, she replied. Tonight is important, because tonight I realized something. Nathaniel leaned forward. And what is that? Abigail inhaled deeply. Her voice came out strong and unwavering. I realized I have been afraid of the wrong thing. Nathaniel blinked. What does that mean? It means, Abigail said, I have been afraid of upsetting you, afraid of embarrassing you, afraid of making noise. But tonight, I saw the truth. You were never protecting me. You were only protecting your image. Nathaniel stepped closer. Abigail, be reasonable. She stepped back slightly, not in fear, in clarity. No, I am finally being reasonable. Victoria scoffed. Don't pretend you have power here. Abigail turned her head sharply toward her. I am not pretending anything. The room went still. Nathaniel looked confused. Victoria looked irritated. Ethan and her aunt exchanged hopeful glances. Abigail continued. You wanted me silent. You wanted me small. But that ends now. Victoria rolled her eyes. Spare us the dramatic speech. Abigail looked at her without flinching. You poured wine on me in front of a room full of witnesses. You mocked me. You tried to tear me down. And you enjoyed it. Victoria paled. And Nathaniel, Abigail added, turning to her husband. You let her. You encouraged her. Nathaniel swallowed hard. Abigail, please. No, Abigail said firmly. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore. Her aunt placed a hand over her heart, overwhelmed with pride. Ethan nodded approvingly. Nathaniel stepped forward, desperate. Where are you going? Abigail held her head high. To speak the truth. And for the first time in years, she felt steady. Not broken, not hidden, but right where she needed to be, on the edge of reclaiming everything that had been taken from her, her voice. The hallway outside the lounge had grown louder. Voices rose and fell in tense waves. Guests crowded closer, waiting for someone to take control of the chaos. The air felt charged, almost electric, as if the mansion itself sensed that a line had finally been crossed. Ethan opened the lounge door slightly and peered out. They're all gathered, he whispered. Everyone is waiting for a statement. Abigail adjusted the shawl around her shoulders. Then it's time. Her aunt squeezed her hand gently. We are right here with you. Abigail nodded. Her heart beat fast, but it no longer felt like a sign of fear. It felt like a drum calling her forward. Nathaniel stepped forward quickly. Abigail, wait. Don't go out there. Let me talk to the guests first. No, she said simply. You've talked enough. Victoria scoffed behind him. What is she going to do? Cry on stage? Abigail looked at her with calm resolve. Not at all. Ethan opened the door fully, and the group stepped into the hallway. The shift in atmosphere was immediate. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. The crowd parted slowly as Abigail walked forward. She felt dozens of eyes on her, some sympathetic, some curious, some hopeful. Nathaniel and Victoria followed close behind, still trying to control the narrative. Nathaniel attempted a reassuring smile directed at the crowd, but it fell flat. He looked strained, desperate, and visibly shaken by how quickly events had spun out of his control. Then a voice cut through the murmurs. Move aside. It was deep, commanding, and instantly recognizable. The hallway fell silent. Arthur Blackwood stepped forward from the far end of the hallway. His presence shifted the entire energy of the space. Tall, dignified, and dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, he looked like a man carved from authority itself. Every relative straightened. Every guest lowered their eyes. Even the staff paused mid-step. Arthur Blackwood was not just Nathaniel's father. He was the patriarch of the Blackwood Empire, a man whose word carried weight in every boardroom and every political circle he stepped into. Tonight, his eyes were colder than anyone had ever seen. Abigail froze for a moment, unsure of what he intended to do. Nathaniel took a nervous step backward as his father approached with long, steady strides. "Dad," Nathaniel said with a forced laugh. "Thank goodness you're here. There's been a misunderstanding." Arthur did not acknowledge him. He reached Abigail first. The entire crowd held its breath. He looked at her, eyes softening with something that looked almost like pain. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Abigail nodded, though her voice shook when she answered, "I will be." Arthur's jaw tightened. He looked down at her stained dress, at the red blotches marking her dress like wounds. His eyes darkened. He turned sharply toward Nathaniel. "What did you do?" Arthur asked, in a low voice that sounded more dangerous than a shout. Nathaniel swallowed hard. "It wasn't me. She tripped. She bumped the glass." Victoria tried to nod beside him. The lie clung to the air like smoke. Arthur stared at him. Then he shifted his gaze to Victoria. "Is that true?" Victoria forced a bright smile. "Yes, it was a complete accident. She panicked and made it bigger than it was." Arthur said nothing for a few seconds, but the silence was heavy, full, and suffocating. Then he lifted his hand. The slap cracked through the hallway like thunder. Nathaniel's head snapped to the side. Gasps filled the hallway. Victoria stumbled backward, shocked, speechless. Even Abigail flinched at the sound. It wasn't the violence of the gesture that stunned the room. It was the meaning behind it. Arthur Blackwood was a man of composure, a man who never raised his voice, let alone his hand. Nathaniel stared at him with disbelief. "Dad, you hit me." Arthur stepped closer, his voice steady as stone. "I disciplined you, because I raised you better than to humiliate your wife in public." Victoria sputtered. "This is absurd. He's not the one who embarrassed her. I did nothing wrong." Arthur turned his cold gaze to her. "You are not family. You do not speak." Victoria's mouth slammed shut. Her face turned pale. Arthur then gestured to the crowd. "All of you saw what happened. All of you heard the recordings. Do not insult my intelligence by repeating lies. No one dared to move." Arthur faced Abigail again. "You should never have been treated this way. Not in this home. Not in front of my family." Abigail's eyes glistened, but she held steady. Arthur lifted a folder he had been holding in his hand. No one had noticed it until now. "And since we are addressing truths," he continued, "there is something else that needs to be made clear." He held the folder up high. "This mansion belongs to Abigail." Shock rippled through the guests. Nathaniel choked. "What are you talking about? This is the family estate." Arthur shook his head slowly. "It was until your wedding day. I transferred ownership to Abigail as a wedding gift. You never appreciated what you had." Victoria let out a strangled sound. "You can't be serious." Arthur looked at her as if she were nothing more than unpleasant noise. "Security will escort you out shortly." Victoria stumbled back in disbelief. "You can't ban me from the mansion." "You do not belong here," Arthur said calmly. "And you never will." The crowd murmured in agreement. Nathaniel looked stunned, betrayed, exposed. Arthur stepped aside and motioned for Abigail to stand forward. "This is her home," he announced to everyone, "and from this moment on, only she decides who remains in it." Abigail stood still, her shoulders rising gently as she breathed. For the first time in her life, inside the Blackwood family, every eye watching her did not see a quiet wife in the background. They saw the rightful owner, and the storm that Nathaniel and Victoria created finally turned back on them with full force. For a long moment, the hallway remained silent after Arthur's declaration. The shock rippled through every guest like a wave crashing onto stone. No one dared to breathe too loudly. No one dared to move. The balance of the entire night had shifted so sharply that people needed a moment to understand what they had just witnessed. Abigail felt the heaviness in her chest slowly dissolve. She stood in the center of the hallway, and for the first time, she did not feel small. She did not feel invisible. She felt present, grounded, aware of her own voice and worth. She lifted her chin slightly, and the whispers in the crowd grew louder. Nathaniel stared at his father. eyes wide with disbelief. His cheek still stung from the slap, and his expression flickered between shock and humiliation. "You can't do this," he finally managed to say, his voice cracking in the middle of the sentence. "You can't just give away the mansion." Arthur looked at him with a disappointment that seemed to age him instantly. "I already did, years ago, because I believed you would cherish the woman you married. Instead, you chose to betray her in the home that was gifted to both of you, but entrusted in her name." Guests exchanged glances, some nodded quietly, others muttered under their breath about justice. Nathaniel looked around desperately, searching for support he no longer had. Victoria stepped forward, her voice trembling. "You can't just throw me out. Nathaniel wants me here." Arthur's eyes hardened. "Nathaniel is no longer in a position to decide that." Victoria's face twisted. "You think you can hold the entire family hostage just because you're the patriarch?" Arthur crossed his arms. "The only hostage tonight was Abigail, trapped in your cruelty." Gasps rose in the hallway. Several guests shook their heads at Victoria's audacity. Nathaniel grabbed Victoria's arm. "Stop talking!" But Victoria pulled away harshly. "Don't tell me what to do. This is all your fault, too." The couple stood in front of everyone, their alliance cracking wide open. The arrogance they had displayed all night seemed to drain from them in real time. Victoria's makeup was smudged from stress. Nathaniel's suit was wrinkled. The glamorous facade they had used to belittle Abigail was now crumbling, loudly and publicly. Miss Pierce, the family attorney, stepped into the hallway with her usual imposing calm. She looked directly at Nathaniel. "We need to speak. Now." Nathaniel blinked rapidly. "About what?" "Your position in the company," she replied. "There are concerns from the board. They have asked me to oversee an emergency discussion. They want immediate clarity on your conduct tonight." Nathaniel's face drained of color. "The board? You told the board?" Arthur answered for her. "They called me. The video reached them before I could." Nathaniel staggered. "They can't make decisions based on one incident." "They can," Miss Pierce said. "And they will." She paused. "This is not one incident. This is a pattern they have previously warned you about." More whispers, more judgment, more phones being checked as the video spread across social media. Arthur turned slightly. "Mr. Hayes." The head of staff stepped forward. "Yes, sir." "Escort Victoria out of the mansion. Now." Victoria's eyes widened in outrage. "You can't do that. I'm with Nathaniel." Arthur responded coldly. "You are with no one here." Two security guards walked up behind her. She tried to step back, but their presence left no room to escape. "This is insane," she snapped. "You people are insane." She pointed at Abigail with a trembling finger. "She ruined everything." Abigail met her stare without a hint of fear. "No, you did." Victoria lunged forward as if to argue again, but the guards gently redirected her toward the exit. Her heels clacked angrily against the floor. The sound faded as she was removed from the hallway entirely. The moment Victoria disappeared, a different tension settled over Nathaniel. Without his mistress by his side, he looked strangely smaller, more exposed. He reached for his father's arm, desperate. "Dad, please, you can't let them do this." Arthur shook his head slowly. "I am not letting them do anything. You did this, and now you will face the consequences." Nathaniel turned toward Abigail as if looking for mercy. "You wouldn't let them take everything from me. You know me. You know I didn't mean for it to go this far." Abigail stared at him, her expression unreadable. The Abigail who once would have defended him or softened the truth for him no longer existed. She took a single, slow breath before speaking. "You did mean it," she said quietly. "Every word you used to tear me down, every lie you told to cover for her, every time you treated me as something that didn't matter, you meant all of it, and now you want to pretend it was an accident." Nathaniel shook his head. "Abigail, please, not like this." "Then how?" she asked calmly. "How would you like me to respond to the humiliation you planned with someone else?" He said nothing. His silence became an admission. Miss Pierce stepped closer. "Nathaniel, the board will likely suspend you while they investigate. You need to prepare for the possibility that you may lose your position entirely." A soft murmur spread through the hallway. The fate of the Blackwood heir was no longer a private conversation, it was a public collapse. Nathaniel looked shattered. His voice cracked again. "I can fix this," Arthur answered sternly. "No, you can't." The hallway felt like a courtroom. Every whisper sounded like a verdict. Every stare felt like a sentence. Arthur placed a hand on Abigail's shoulder. "You don't have to stay for the rest of this discussion. You have said enough for tonight." Abigail nodded faintly. She felt a mix of strength and exhaustion weaving through her, but she also felt something else: freedom. As she stepped away from the center of the hallway, the crowd parted for her. Some guests murmured supportive words. Some looked apologetic. Others simply stared in awe. Behind her, Nathaniel finally sank onto a bench near the wall. His head fell into his hands. For the first time in his life, he realized he had lost everything he thought he controlled, and nothing could save him now. The hallway slowly emptied as the worst of the chaos settled. Guests began to drift back into the ballroom, but the mood was completely transformed. The bright energy that once filled the mansion had been replaced with a quiet awareness. People spoke in low voices. Some exchanged glances of remorse for not stepping in sooner. Others whispered about what would happen to the Blackwood legacy. Everyone understood that something irreversible had occurred. Abigail remained standing at the edge of the hallway, feeling the weight of a long night beginning to lift. The shawl around her shoulders felt warm now, rather than defensive. Her breath finally steadied. Her hands no longer trembled. The wine stain remained across her dress, but it no longer felt like a mark of humiliation. It felt like a symbol of the moment she stopped allowing herself to be diminished. Her aunt approached and placed a gentle hand on her arm. "You did well, dear. You were brave." Abigail allowed herself a small breath of relief. "I just said what was true." Ethan stepped beside her. "Sometimes, the truth is the bravest thing anyone can say." Mr. Hayes reappeared quietly. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said with a respectful nod. "Would you like to return to the ballroom or rest in the lounge? We can escort you anywhere you choose." Abigail glanced toward the open double doors of the ballroom. Dozens of eyes looked her way, not with judgment now, but with something closer to admiration. She had been silent for so long. Tonight, she felt something shift inside her. She no longer wanted to hide. "I will go back," she said. Her aunt smiled. Ethan nodded. Together, they walked toward the ballroom. The murmurs softened as she entered. The room, once filled with glittering laughter, now quieted as though acknowledging her presence. People straightened in their seats. Some stood. A few even clapped softly before stopping themselves, uncertain if applause was appropriate in such a tense moment. But the intention was clear: support, recognition, respect. Abigail stepped further inside. She felt a surprising steadiness in her chest. The piano music resumed, softer this time, almost reverent. A woman she barely knew approached first. "We are so sorry for what happened," she said. "You didn't deserve any of it." Another guest followed. "You handled yourself with grace." Another added, "If you ever need anything, please let us know." Abigail nodded politely. She didn't know how to respond to kindness she had never expected from this family. It felt strange, but it also felt right. Then Arthur entered the ballroom. Conversations halted again. The crowd parted for him naturally, the way waves move aside for a ship that has sailed through these waters many times. His expression had softened since the confrontation. The hard lines of anger had faded, replaced by something closer to sorrow, but also pride. He approached Abigail directly. "Is there anything you require?" he asked. "Anything at all?" Abigail shook her head gently. "Thank you. I am all right." He nodded once. "I want you to know," he said, lowering his voice, "that what happened tonight will not be forgotten. Not by the family, not by the board, and not by me." She looked up at him. "I never wanted to cause trouble." "You didn't," Arthur said firmly. "You exposed it." For the first time, she saw tears in the older man's eyes. Only a glimmer, but enough to reveal the depth of disappointment he felt for his son's actions. "I am sorry for what Nathaniel did," he said, "and for the years you endured in silence." Abigail's voice softened. "Thank you." He took a slow breath. "The board is removing him from all decision-making roles until further notice. They believe he is unfit to represent the family's interests at this time." Abigail bowed her head slightly. She did not feel triumph. She felt closure. "And Abigail?" Arthur continued quietly. "This home is yours to command. If you ever wish to change anything, you have full authority." She blinked. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," he replied. "Just live. Live freely. Live without fear. This house was given to you because I saw strength in you long before you saw it in yourself." Her eyes warmed. "Thank you." Arthur placed a gentle hand on her shoulder before stepping aside to address the room. Guests straightened as he spoke. "Tonight, we witnessed behavior that has no place in this family," he announced. "We will not tolerate cruelty, inside this home or outside it. Abigail is the mistress of this mansion. Her word is final." Abigail inhaled quietly. The title struck her deeper than expected. Mistress of the mansion. A title she never claimed, yet one she had now earned. Arthur continued, "Nathaniel will not rejoin the event tonight. He has been escorted to the study to speak with the board in a private setting." The guests murmured again. A few frowned. Many nodded approvingly. The piano paused. A soft hush fell over the room. Arthur then turned to Abigail. "Would you like to say anything?" Abigail hesitated. She felt dozens of expectant eyes on her. She could feel her heart beating fast again, but this time, it was not from fear. It was from the sense of possibility blooming within her. She walked slowly toward the front of the room. Her footsteps were soft but purposeful. When she stood before the crowd, she rested her hands gently on the shawl around her shoulders and spoke in a quiet, even tone. "I don't want to talk about anger," she said, "or revenge, or shame." Her voice did not waver. "I want to talk about dignity and the importance of knowing your own worth, even when others try to convince you that you have none." Guests leaned closer. The room held its breath. "For years, I believed silence kept the peace," she continued. "Tonight, I realized silence only protects the wrong people." Arthur closed his eyes, moved. Abigail took a slow breath. "I will not live in silence anymore." A ripple of approval moved through the crowd. People nodded. Some clapped quietly before stopping again, but the sentiment was clear. She stepped down from the front and joined her aunt and Ethan again. The tension in the room slowly dissolved. Conversations shifted from judgment to relief. Abigail felt lighter, braver, seen. Nathaniel's downfall was no longer the focus. Her emergence was. For the first time since marrying into the Blackwood family, Abigail felt something she had forgotten she could feel. She felt free.